Welcome to online training on impact evaluation for evidence-based development for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs of the Gambia. Module 5. Qualitative approaches in impact evaluation, non-experimental methods. Module outline. We'll share on the learning outcomes for the overall module. Then we'll share on the module lessons. And this module constitutes 4 lessons. These are: the first lesson is most significant change technique. The second lesson is appreciative inquiry. The third lesson is outcome mapping. And the fourth and last lesson is outcome harvesting. The expected learning outcomes for this module are that by the end of the module, the participants will be able to differentiate between experimental designs and non-experimental methods and approaches of impact evaluation. They will also be able to understand and substantiate how change happened and communicate the progress towards impact to the clients, management, and the partners. Module 5, Lesson 1. Most significant change. Lesson outline. We will share expected outcomes under this lesson. We'll provide an introduction to the lesson, and we'll be able to examine what most significant change is about, as well as look at the detailed steps that are involved in using the most significant change tool. Expected outcomes. It is envisaged that at the end of this lesson, the participants will be able to explain what most significant change technique can add to program impact evaluation. They will be able to identify situations that may merit application of most significant change when the technique may be appropriate. They will be able to identify different most significant change approaches and the relevant steps that are involved, and then be able to apply best practices for most significant change in relation to program impact evaluation. Introduction. One of the broad ways to categorize research designs is to divide them into experimental and non-experimental research. There are various benefits as well as drawbacks of experimental research design over non-experimental research design, and vice versa. What it means is that each one of them has got its own advantages and disadvantages, and therefore having both is a complementarity that can bring value added to the research outcome. There are various situations in which experimental research design can only work, while in other situations, only non-experimental research design can work. Therefore, selection of experimental and non-experimental research designs only depends on type of research question and the field of study that we want to undertake. Modules 3 and 4 provided an in-depth focus on evaluation designs, as well as quantitative data generation and analysis to inform decisions. Module 5 focuses on qualitative approaches to impact evaluation. And this lesson dwells on one of the qualitative approaches, that is the most significant change technique. So what is our understanding of most significant change technique? Have we heard about this? And better still, have we been able to be involved with this technique? What can we share based on the knowledge that we have about most significant change technique? Most significant change technique, its main aim is on collection and systematic analysis of the significant changes that have occurred in a target population of an intervention. From this perspective, most significant change technique is dubbed as a tool for thought than one for action. Why is that so? It's because it is premised on perceived assessment of the felt change that has occurred among the subjects that are involved. In this regard, we see that most significant change technique facilitates project or program improvement by focusing the direction of work away from less valued directions towards more fully shared visions and explicitly valued directions. It involves collection and systematic participatory interpretation of the stories of significant changes that are coming from the field level. So what it does, or what it entails, is that it brings to the fore stories about who did what, when, and why, and the reasons why the event was important. One key characteristic about most significant change technique is that it does not employ quantitative indicators, as we have elaborately discussed and described in the previous modules. This distinguishes the technique from others in it being a form of participatory monitoring and evaluation, and the participatory aspect of it comes into being because many project stakeholders are involved both in deciding what sort of change has occurred to be recorded and in analyzing the relevant data that would be able to give evidence about the sort of change that has been identified. In this regard, we see that many players that are involved in the intervention have to be taken on board in identifying the significant changes that have taken place so that there's consensus over what is deemed as significant. What does the most significant change process involve? There are various central processes of most significant change technique. The key one entails collection and systematic selection of reported changes by means of purposive sampling with a bias in favor of success. The biasness that we are referring to here is one that deliberately focuses on what can be described as a positive element that would mirror the success of the intervention. So the change that we're concerned with here is a positive change that has happened in the population that was focused for the intervention under discussion. In this respect, the technique focuses on involving and asking key questions from the field staff by way of eliciting anecdotes from the stakeholders, by way of focusing on what most significant change has happened as a result of an initiative, which will be objectively arrived at with the role and contribution as well as participation of all the stakeholders. And finally, why those stakeholders think that change has occurred. So they need to elaborate by way of evidence that objectively characterizes the change that we speak about that can be attributed to the intervention or initiative that has been implemented. Therefore, for the most significant change technique to take place and be applied effectively, there must be appropriate enablers that will facilitate the application of the technique. What are these enablers that are central and crucial for the application of the most significant change technique? There are 6 broad enabling contextual factors that will be able to drive a successful implementation of the most significant change technique. These are: there must be inherent support coming from the senior management of the organization or program where most significant change technique need to be applied. There must also be an unquestionable commitment to the process of a leader. So political decision is important in applying the most significant change technique. Also, there must be a conducive environment where the technique needs to be applied. And therefore, this would necessitate that there is mutual trust that has been developed between the field staff that are going to be involved in using the tool, as well as the villagers who will be able to attach the change that we could be talking about as a result of an initiative that has taken place. The technique also thrives well in an organizational culture that prioritizes reflection and learning. What this suggests is that there must be an existing culture that will be crucial as an enabler for the technique to occur, that is already inbuilt ability for staff to reflect and learn. But also, there must be an inbuilt infrastructure that enables regular feedback of the results to stakeholders. What this means is that an organization must inculcate the practice of disseminating results as well as providing feedback by way of interaction with the stakeholders. So if this infrastructure does not exist, overnight, an organization that undertakes or applies the most significant change technique may not successfully implement the technique. And crucially, there must be adequate time that will allow the running of several cycles of the technique so that we are able to refine the results that come from use of the most significant change technique. This point underscores the dimension of continuous learning that must be occurring in the location where the project or program has embraced use of most significant change technique. So what are the steps that are involved in the use of the most significant change tool? As already alluded to, the most significant change technique is an emerging one, and there have been many adaptations that have already been made to it. A comprehensive overview of what a full implementation of most significant change might look like is described using 10 steps. The first step involves how to start and raise interest. Of the changes that are being envisaged within the population where the initiative has taken place. The second step entails clearly defining the domains of change that will be deemed as significant within the population of interest based on the initiative that has been implemented. The third step entails defining the time frame for reporting the changes that have occurred. So we must have a very discrete reporting period within which we can locate the changes that have taken place. When all this is done, then we are ready to gather the stories that will be refined and be able to be categorized as significant. When all those stories have been collected, they will be subjected to an objective criteria in order to select those which are eligible to be deemed as the most significant of the stories that have so far emerged. Then we should be able to provide feedback about the results of the selection process. When those changes have been selected, they will need to be vetted through a verification process. And then the verified stories have to be quantified. When they are quantified, a secondary analysis will need to be undertaken to complement or validate these changes that have emerged, the stories that have been emerged. And in these processes, shortfalls may be identified in arriving at the significant change stories. And therefore, those shortfalls will be plowed back to the system, allowing appropriate adjustment so that the system or the technique can bring better quality of changes that can be identified. So the revision of the system will already provide an opportunity for learning and then feedback and building a better system. Any comments and questions on the most significant change technique, description, as well as application? Okay. If there are no comments and questions, in the module lesson narrative, there are a set of questions as quizzes to assess our grasp of the lesson. These ones are meant to test our ability of how we have understood the lesson. It's not meant for submission. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Merci beaucoup